The high-stake elections in Taiwan have begun. Voters began casting ballots in Taiwan's presidential and legislative election. A poll closely watched as China steps up its rhetoric over the self-ruled island. Polls opened at 8 a.m. local time at nearly 18,000 locations from the island's south to its capital, Taipei. Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen has cast a vote. Remember, Tsai is constitutionally barred from standing again after 2 terms in office. All running presidential contestants, they have already cast their votes. Lai Ching-te from the ruling DPP, Ho Yo-hee from the opposition party KMT, and TPP leader Ko Wen-jae, they were among the early voters. Meanwhile, Taiwan's defense ministry says it had detected 2 Chinese balloons crossing the Taiwan Strait in the last 24 hours, one of which flew over Taiwan itself. In other news, China's social media platform Weibo has blocked a hashtag on Taiwan's elections. It had become one of the most trending topics on the site this morning, but it was soon taken down. Earlier, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken met with Liu Shanchao, a Chinese diplomat and a top contender to be China's next foreign minister. The meeting took place in Washington, D.C., and that too just hours before the polls in Taiwan. The U.S. continues to caution China against using the elections as a pretext for instability. As per reports quoting the State Department, Blinken has asked China for cross-strait stability.
All right, thank you, Press.
And now, joining us live from Taipei, we have with us our Voice of America correspondent, Elizabeth Lee. Hi, Elizabeth. Now, the high-stakes election in Taiwan is currently underway. Talk to us about the global implications of today's polls in Taiwan.
Well, first of all, the most advanced semiconductor manufacturing hub is in Taiwan, and so that's one reason why it's important. And also, the Taiwan Strait, which is between mainland China and Taiwan, is also a key maritime trading location. And so for these reasons alone, the world is watching to see whether China will become even more aggressive toward Taiwan or will be kind of pulling back. This tense relationship really depends on who wins the presidency. China prefers Ho Yo-hee, which is a KMT candidate, because he says he would like to open dialogue with China if he becomes president. And then the DPP candidate, William Lai, or Lai Ching-te, is a candidate that Beijing prefers not to become the next president, because the DPP party traditionally has been pushing for independence.
Right, Elizabeth, you spoke about the significance of the elections in Taiwan today. And clearly, the elections in Taiwan, they are being touted as a choice between independence and unification. What are you gauging? What is the buzz at the polling stations right now?
Most of the people in Taiwan prefers the status quo, but the politicians have another kind of way of trying to reach the voters. Some are using a scare tactic, and also Beijing has been saying it's a choice between peace and war. So it's a lot of political rhetoric, but the people of Taiwan really prefers the status quo, and it's really up to them as to decide which candidate can best achieve the status quo.
Elizabeth, just a short while ago when you joined us here on WION, we spoke on how some opinion polls say that the young Taiwanese want change, while older voters demand stability. Shed some light on that.
Yeah, and this is really to understand the history of Taiwan. A lot of the older voters are second, third generation children of the people with the KMT who came over at the end of the Civil War in China, where the KMT was defeated and retreated to Taiwan, and the communists won. So the descendants of those people are still in favor of the KMT, and really it's not so much unification in the sense of them wanting to live under communist rule, but to them, they still identify themselves. They have a Chinese identity. Now, the younger generation were born and raised in Taiwan. They've never really had the same kind of connection with mainland China as a lot of the descendants of the KMT folks who initially came over. So they have a more Taiwanese identity, and so they tend to feel that they've been independent because their government is different and they're separate from China. And so that's the difference between the two.
Right. Elizabeth, thanks very much for joining us here on WION and getting us on-ground updates on the polls in Taiwan. We also have with us political analyst Ross Darrell Feingold. He's joining us live from Taipei. Hi, Mr. Feingold. Now, the elections in Taiwan is being closely watched by US and China. Talk to us as to why the Taiwan elections are significant for the world and what is at stake this time.
Really, what makes this election something that the world is looking at is the possibility of war. China has not renounced the use of force to bring Taiwan under its sovereignty, and they've made very clear that they retain that option to use force. So the potential for a war over Taiwan is something that, again, it attracts global attention, not only because of supply chain type of issues or that Taiwan manufactures most of the advanced semiconductors that are used in all sorts of gadgets from consumer electronics to cloud computing servers, but just the fact that a war could be so catastrophic as we've seen with other wars, whether that's Ukraine, Russia, or currently in the Middle East and Gaza Strip. So I think people around the world are just frightened about the possibility that there could actually be a war where I'm speaking from.
Mr. Feingold, you speak of how there's a fear of war that looms over in Taiwan. Clearly, the high-stakes election in the island carries an outsized importance. Talk to us about the election in Taiwan today. How will that have an impact on the global and regional dynamics in the South China Sea?
Well, globally, again, people are looking at this election because of Taiwan's role in the technology supply chain and just the possibility of another large war breaking out. Regionally, that's a great question because Japan and Australia, they have good relations with Taiwan. But ASEAN countries are really very interesting because they don't want to take sides in U.S.-China disputes or China-Taiwan disputes. So we typically see from most of the ASEAN members that they support what's called a one China policy. They're very vocal in opposing Taiwan's independence. And they don't want to take sides in the great power competition between the United States and China. Although the outgoing government in Taiwan has made a lot of effort to improve relations with ASEAN countries, most of those countries, they want to have a lot of trade with Taiwan, but they don't want to support Taiwan politically.
Well, Mr. Feingold, last question to you. Let's talk about the voter sentiment here. What are the concerns for the voters this time around? Is the question of China dominating all the other concerns of the voters?
That's a great question. And actually, the answer is no. China does not dominate the concerns of every single voter here in Taiwan. Just like in any democracy that has elections, people here in Taiwan are concerned about economic issues. They're concerned about really slow wage growth, high inflation, the cost of raising children, the cost of housing. So for a lot of voters, China's not the #1 issue. It's actually economic issues and how the economy affects them personally. That is the driver for their voting decision. And also, I think voters want transparency and honesty in government. And they want to know that the next person to be president for the upcoming 4 years is going to be an honest president.
Well, Mr. Feingold, thanks very much for joining us here on WION and sharing your insights with us. We'll, of course, be tracking the Taiwan polls very closely here on WION.
Thank you.